Welcome everyone to Ford, Montana's Supreme Court Candidate Forum. I am your MC tonight. I am Auntie E, and I am so excited to kick this off. Are y'all ready?
We are ready.
Ready? First thing I want to point out is that we are filming right now. We are live, and this will be uploaded on the MCAT website starting tonight if you want to go back and see some refreshing on what some of these answers are. But we would like to take a moment and start with some 2-minute long, and I do mean 2-minute long, introductions. We all watched the VP debate, so we want none of that malarkey. Exactly 2 minutes.
I like that malarkey.
After we give you guys those 2-minute introductions, we will be moving on into long form questions where you will once again have 2 minutes to respond. If you do go over your time, luckily we have John over here to put you on mute. So keep it sharp, keep it cute, or John will put you on mute. And he is ready to go. While you are giving those 2-minute answers to those long form questions, he has a 30-second and 50-second marker that he will show up to let you know you're coming down on your time. In between those long form questions, we will also be doing some fun rapid fire questions to keep it light, keep it cute, keep it moving, and to get just a little bit shady with y'all because we want to know who you are as people, not just as candidates. So please remember that this is a forum. It is not a debate. Each of you will get your moment to shine, so we would like an answer, not a rebuttal. We also have some nice, fun little goodie bags for everyone in the audience to participate, because let's be real, these people will be working for you. So if you want to look in your goodie bags, first we have the jargon giraffe. So if they get too into that niche, that fancy talk, that jargon, raise it up and let them, so they can go back, rehash, and put that into some plain Jane language. Okay, the next thing we have in that divine little bag is a gavel. And so you can use that if you hear something you love, bang it on your chair. And if you hear something you like, again, bang it on your chair, not your neighbor, and let them know how you feel. Because again, they work for you. So to get it kicked off and to get this started, I'm gonna pass it over to Sage, who will give us a quick little briefing and reminder on what the Montana Supreme Court is and why it is important.
So essentially, a state Supreme Court is like the highest level of a court in the state. Its main job is to review decisions by the lower courts to make sure that the law was applied correctly. It handles important legal questions, interprets state laws, and makes final rulings that can set precedents for future cases. Basically, it ensures that justice is upheld within the state. And now I will turn it over to Sophie.
Thank you, Sage. All right, with that, I would now love to invite the Supreme Court candidates to introduce themselves. So we will start with Judge Catherine Vittigary.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with the group that is assembled here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to be here. I am Judge Catherine Vittigary. Vittigary is a Basque name. I'm proud of my heritage. It means high road, and Catherine means pure, so my name means pure high road. Anyway, I was born in Sidney, Montana, where I still live. Grew up on a farm and ranch outside of Sidney. By way of background for what qualifies me for this position, I practiced law for almost 18 years, and I have been a district court judge for more than 21 years. I serve as a district court judge in the Montana 7th Judicial District, which includes 5 counties, Dawson, Macomb, Prairie, Richland, and Webo, located in eastern Montana. District court judges are general jurisdiction trial judges who handle every single kind of case. In addition to handling the cases we handle directly, we also address appeals from the courts of limited jurisdiction. The decisions we made are what are appealed to the Montana Supreme Court. I got into this race because I believe at this time in history we need experienced, fair, impartial justices on Montana's highest court, and we need to keep politics out of it. Which is especially hard to do at this time and that's why we need people that are committed to that, because there is a concerted effort to politicize our courts, which would make it problematic for our continued fairness and impartiality.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll move on to Judge Jeremiah Lynch.
Hi, I'm Jerry Lynch. I was born and raised in Butte along with my wife. 49 years we've been married. I retired from being a United States magistrate judge after nearly 14 years of holding that position. And I was retired for 3 years, and I woke up one day and I said to Terry, I think I'm going to run for the Supreme Court. She said, are you sure? The next day I got up and I said, how did you sleep? And she said, not worth a darn. I had a nightmare you were going to run for the Supreme Court. But I am running for the Supreme Court, just as Judge Bittigary said. Our courts are under attack, and it's a concerted effort. And I think most of you, probably all of you, who, because you're here tonight, you pay attention. But our courts are a co-equal branch of government. It's not lesser than the legislature, it's not lesser than the executive branch, but it's being attacked. And I emphasize this to everybody. We are a constitutional democracy. We are not a simple democracy where majority rules. We're constitutional in the sense that the Constitution preserves each and every one of our rights. And the Montana Constitution, which both Judge Bittigary and I think is a marvelous document, and I'm sure you do, it has to be upheld. We don't need politicians on the Supreme Court or lackeys of politicians on the Supreme Court to uphold what are clearly unconstitutional laws. I'm running for 12 reasons. Bear with me, I only have a couple minutes. But my 10 grandchildren, the first 10, 11 are your families, your children, your grandchildren, and 12 are future generations. We are the stewards of their future, I believe, and I know Judge Bittigary does. We have an obligation to pass to them a future that maintains the rights we have enjoyed under the Montana Constitution, and I'm quite frank about this, especially reproductive autonomy. That's why I'm running.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, the other candidates chose not to attend this evening, but if you want, you can go learn more about them on their websites.
Or we can tell you.
Yeah, or you can just go for it. You have time.
All right, well, thank you for those 2-minute intros, and thank you for keeping it under 2 minutes. We were counting, so I think that was a really great place to start off. And now we're going to dive right on into this interrogation, AKA forum. So I hope you guys are ready and those seats are comfortable because they're about to get hot. So I'm going to pass it over to Sage.
So you guys both touched on this a little bit, but we're going to start off again with Judge Catherine Bittigary about what past experiences you feel like best prepared you for serving on the Supreme Court.
Thank you. I think basically, of course, you know, your educational background matters. I neglected to say that I'm a graduate of the University of Montana and the University of Montana School of Law. I spent a lot of time in here because I started out as a music major, and we had to come to every single music performance that was held during the time that I did that. And that, in a way, prepares me too. Music is a universal language, and I think in the face of so much divisiveness that we have in this world, music can bridge that gap sometimes. But my qualifications or experiences in the past that prepare me for this include my background of my parents. My parents were immigrants who came to the United States as adults from the Pyrenees Mountains of southwestern France after World War II. They grew up in occupied France from the time my mom was 9 when all that started, my dad was 11. That experience of living under the occupation of a dictator from another country, it instilled in them a deep appreciation for democracy, which they passed on to us kids. So I'm in this and developed the background and experience that I already mentioned in my less than 2 minutes that I took at the beginning, because I want to do my part to maintain democracy for us and our future generations. So from being an attorney for 18 years to being a judge for almost 22 years now, I think that I'm prepared and have the requisite experience and backbone to be on the Supreme Court to make decisions based upon just the relevant facts before me with the established precedent without bowing to external pressures and taking into the decision-making irrelevant things that I might personally believe or others think I should believe.
Good answer. And I will follow that up with, if you had to sing a karaoke song right now, what would it be? And can you do it a cappella? Because I'm sure we'd all love to hear it.
I am woman, I am strong. Okay.
Don't have me do that.
You should warm up your vocal cords. Just start doing some warm-ups
You
right now.
ready, huh?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, and we'll start this question off with Judge Lynch, and then also have Catherine Vittigeri answer it again, or answer it as well, sorry. What are your views on judicial ethics, and how do you ensure that you adhere to ethical standards?
Well, my view on judicial ethics is that they're paramount to an impartial judiciary. And the impartial judiciary is the bedrock of our democracy, our constitutional democracy, which I mentioned. Every judge needs to be 100% ethical. I think, unfortunately, today there's some concerns on a national level about ethics, and I'm not getting into that. I will say this, the best judge of whether I would be ethical is to look at my almost 14-year career as a judge. And I've abided by all ethics, and that will how I would move into the future. But I will say this, one of the reasons that I'm running, I've already gave you a bunch of them, but one is to maintain the ethics and integrity of the Supreme Court, because it has to be an independent body, free of politics.
And then,
Want me to
yes,
answer
and you
it
do
too?
answer.
I agree 100% with what was just said. We as judges and attorneys, attorneys before, we all bear a responsibility as ambassadors for the whole judicial system to behave in ethical ways. We are involved with having to enforce laws, interpret laws, and if we ourselves can't behave ethically, it really speaks volumes as to whether we have any credibility at all to be telling anybody else what to be doing. As for me, I've lived in eastern Montana most of my life, where I was, born and raised in a fishbowl, basically, because in rural communities, everybody knows a lot about you. I'm not going to say everything, but they know a lot about you. And so that's kind of served me well to be a district court judge, that I've lived there my whole life, because you learn early on when you live in places like that to be authentic and that you can't fake your way through things. And one of the guiding principles in our rules of ethics is that to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, and which I like that, but I don't like that it should be just an appearance. It should be that you really are not doing anything that's improper.
Awesome, thank you. I heard some gavels out there. And so this is a question to Judge Lynch. What was your first job, and what lesson from that job do you carry with you today?
My first job was as a member of the Teamster Union unloading trucks in Butte, Montana. I'm Butte born and raised. I may have mentioned that. I did mention that. And my wife Terry's also from Butte, and we call ourselves the children of the strike. And I say that in a very positive sense. I was born in 1951. There was a strike in 52, 54, 57, 62, and 67. The point I want to make about that is that that's what gives you your DNA. I think two of the great equalizers, the two greatest equalizers in our country, number one, a free quality public education and unions. I say that because it's solidarity that keeps us together. Solidarity is what will allow us to proceed forward instead of going backward, which we hear so much about today. So that's my first job. I don't know how good I was at it, but it was a tough one.
So we're going to have you guys both answer this question, starting off with time for Catherine Vittigeri to talk, and then moving on for Judge Jeremiah Lynch to talk. How do you believe diversity on the bench impacts judicial decision-making?
I think diversity in any setting has a big impact because the experiences we have form us and help form our ability to perceive things and to notice different things. And while, as far as a judicial setting is concerned, you should confine yourself to what's been presented to you in that particular case, and I feel strongly about that we shouldn't be bringing external things into the mix when deciding issues. I know that my having been a woman my whole life gives me, I've experienced things that my male sibling and peers never experienced that makes me notice maybe things that they might not notice even in what's presented. And so I know that culturally, because I was raised by European parents, I know that there's differences in culture. I know racially there are differences, the experiences historically that people have, that is carried through in our DNA, I think, affect how you perceive things. And just like we have a jury system where we trust a jury of 12 people of our peers to make a decision well, and I think that they do a great job, diversity creates that same opportunity that we are going to have better outcomes, better solutions, better steps forward by having diversity.
Well, I agree with everything Judge Bittigary said. I would say this, that judges are in a unique position where you get a case and your goal is to master the law that's controlling in that case and have a command of the facts. And it's not like a legislature that can make policy decisions. However, diversity is important because, especially at the appellate court level, as our Supreme Court, because you do get different viewpoints on how people perceive different facts based upon their background. That's just a fact of life. I think we've made pretty good strides in Montana on diversity on the benches, but not enough. But I do think diversity, we all know this, diversity is important in every aspect of our life because we're all living in the same place as far as I know.
Good answer. And this question is to Judge Bittigary. How do you feel about sharks, and more importantly, Shark Week?
Well, I think that sharks are beautiful animals. I happen to have 6 grandchildren with 2 on the way, and 2 of those grandchildren happen to be shark fans. And in fact, I happen to be with one of them just recently who has shark pajamas. And sharks, as we humans and everything else below and above and around us, have their important role in our environment and contribute to it, because I believe we're all interconnected, no matter what.
Thank you very much. All right, and we'll also have both judges answer this question. And we'll start with Judge Lynch. What do you see as the most pressing legal or judicial issues facing Montanans in the coming years?
The most pressing issues facing Montana is what I mentioned at the outset, is to maintain judicial independence first and foremost, because that is what controls everything else. We have a marvelous Constitution, as both Judge Bittigary and I talked about. That Constitution hasn't been completely litigated, but as you know, the one area that has been litigated most is the right to privacy. We also have a right to individual dignity. The clean and healthful environment issue is going to be before the court in the future. Now, you understand the constraints we have in not being able to say, because we can't say how we're going to rule. But in this fast-moving world that we're in, the state constitution is going to be paramount in determining how we proceed forward in the state.
Am I supposed to answer that too?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I was waiting for him to hold up the
rules,
sign.
but I forgot.
You beat me to it. You ain't under a minute.
So the question again was what? I'm sorry, I was
Yeah.
listening to the answer, but then I was
No
thinking
worries. The question is, what do you see as the most pressing legal or judicial issues facing Montanans in the coming years?
Yeah, I agree that what's pressing. We have a couple of things that are really pressing. Is that our individual rights have been under attack, and so the independence of the judiciary is paramount because our state constitution, like the United States Constitution, requires separation of powers, and the reason for that, of course, is to help avoid the concentration of power in any one area, and to avoid a situation where powerful people can abuse power in a way that harms the general public. And so it's for that reason that we have the three co-equal branches, each with its own distinct roles and responsibilities. And it's not the job of the judiciary to address policy issues or to enact laws or to legislate from the bench, like sometimes the court has been accused of doing. It is the responsibility, however, for the court, and particularly the Montana Supreme Court, when challenges are raised or when laws are passed that do not meet our constitutional standards, that they are declared unconstitutional. That is the role of the Montana Supreme Court, ultimately, to be the guardian of the rights that are guaranteed to each of us as Montanans.
Thank you. This question is for Judge Lynch. What is the weirdest thing, or at least the weirdest thing you're willing to admit on camera, that you did during the COVID lockdown?
Wow. That's none of your business.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about privacy, weren't we?
He's going to invoke his right of privacy.
That's privacy, man. I want to, if I could just add one thing to what Judge Bittiger and I both said, that and the citizens of Montana have to be aware of what I'm calling a false dichotomy between the attacks on the judiciary being not by every member of the legislature, but by a lot. It's when I hear the Senate Majority Leader say that the judicial system is the smallest of the three branches and doesn't have as much power as the legislature or the executive branch. That should be of concern to everybody in this room.
So again, I'm going to ask both of you, starting off with Judge Bittiger, how do you stay informed about developments in the law and changes in societal values?
Well, I read. I read a lot. I don't read word for word every decision that the Supreme Court makes because I have so much other important information I need to be reading on cases that are actually before me. So for those cases that are actually before me, I read every word that's filed because I know how hard the attorneys work to put together the briefs that they file and to prepare for oral arguments. So I read all of those things. I skim the other opinions to kind of just have a general idea, and then if that case is on point on an issue that I'm addressing, I read every word then. I also read legal and judicial journals, and I do my continuing legal education, and I like history. I read, I don't know, different kinds of books and things on the law.
That Judge Bittiger encapsulates the same thing. I would say that since I retired, which was 4 years ago, I do try to stay up. I do stay up on the law. As the old saying goes, the law is a jealous mistress. And after a while, you quit reading novels and read boring opinions. But it's important, and I do stay up on particularly the Montana Supreme Court decisions, the Ninth Circuit Court decisions, and having been a federal judge here, the decisions out of the District Court in Montana, and legal journals. And other books, you're probably going to be a question in the future, but I just read another on textualism versus how you interpret the Constitution. I just read a marvelous book by Justice Breyer that everyone should read called Interpreting the Constitution, why he chose pragmatism over textualism, because that is so out in the forefront these days. But just reading.
Reading is fundamental. This next question goes to Judge Bidigary. If you could meet one famous person, dead or alive, and not Taylor Swift, who would it be?
Johnny Cash.
Great answer. All right, and our final question before we move to audience questions is also for both Judge Lynch and Judge Bidigary. What steps would you take to ensure that the court's decisions are fair and inclusive?
Well, first of all, I'm just a little bit on how the process works, which some of you may know. There's a conference when every case comes in by the 7 justices on the court. Then the case after conference is assigned to a particular judge. The chief judge, which is the position I'm running for, has the authority to decide which of the other justices should be assigned a particular case. So it's the discussion, it's the interaction between all the judges, because all of us come from being an individual judge, at least Judge Bidigary and I, and then you get to this 7-person judge. That's a different dynamic. And it's a good dynamic, because sometimes you're just the Lone Ranger there sitting in your office and you know what's right. But anyway, the dynamic is very important in order to reach a fair decision, everybody being open-minded.
And I don't really have anything to add to that, because the type of judge I've been, as Judge Lynch says, is a district court judge where I decide the case by myself with the input of what the attorneys have presented and what's in the file, you know. And sometimes I do my own individual research, and I'm fortunate finally in the last half of being a judge, the last 10 years, having had a law clerk that also assists me with legal research. But that's what I've done in the past, so I understand that on the Supreme Court it's going to be different, and that I think that it'll be amazing, really, actually, to have the input of other people, because I do really believe that collectively we can make better decisions than we can individually, because I recognize each of us is limited in certain ways.
Amazing. Thank you guys for bearing with us through that. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We have pens and paper in all of your bags. If you want to jot down some questions, don't be afraid to make them hard-hitting, as these candidates do work for you. We'll be having a staff member, Hannah, over here with a Halloween bucket coming on through and collecting your questions. And we'll see you all in 5.
All right, we're going to jump into some audience questions. Please bear with me. I hope you guys have good handwriting. Hope you took penmanship as your elective. This goes to both judges candidates, What can the public do to fight back against the attacks we know are coming during the next legislative session, more importantly, on the independence of the court?
Elect me and elect Judge Bidigary. And that's a very good question. Elections have consequences, as we all know. And we have a majority of one political party now, and that's the way democracy works. But the thing that we have expressed, both of us, is maintaining the independence of the judiciary in order to protect individual rights. I keep using the term constitutional democracy, which I know you understand, but please stay aware of that. Just because you have a majority in the legislature does not mean you can do anything you wish. What you can do, I will say this, I want you to challenge me, I want you to challenge my opponent. Most importantly, I want you to challenge yourself and your friends and neighbors to do their due diligence as a citizen. I mentioned to one of these young ladies before we started that Louis Brandeis, a famous Supreme Court justice, said the highest office in our land is that of citizen. Mm-hmm. But I will be honest with you, I get a bit discouraged because the citizens are not necessarily doing their job. They have to be informed And one of the things we battle, because of the high intensity of, for instance, the Senate election in Montana, is making sure people understand the importance of the courts to their everyday life in every respect. So anyway, all of us need to do our due diligence as the highest office in the land, that being a citizen.
And springboarding off of that, though, the actual issue it's going to start in the legislature. And so doing our job as citizens, or your job as citizens, is going to be really to inform everybody that you know or that you touch about their civic duty and about how our process actually works. If there are bills introduced during the next legislative session, I guess it's incumbent on each of us as citizens to pay attention to what those bills are. And if the person who wrote this question, you know, it's a very important question, it's going to be important that you rally the troops and you have some sort of a grassroots effort to let the legislature know what you as citizens think. I've been campaigning now for almost 15 months, and everywhere I go, people, the one common thing is they don't want the judiciary to be political. They don't want one political party controlling all three branches of government. I would be as afraid if it were, you know, it happens to be that the Republicans control the legislative and executive branches. I would be as concerned if it was the Democrats and the Democrats were actively trying to pack the Supreme Court with judges that they thought were Democrats. That just upsets the balance of power and the protections that separation of powers is intended to provide us. So it's really important that the message get to the legislators, because the word we are getting is that they have enough, that it's going to pass. They've decided that they already have the votes to pass making the judiciary partisan. And that's contrary to what the voters are indicating they want. And so the message needs to get to them so that they rethink what they're doing.
The one thing, if I might add, is that both Judge Bittigary and I have been traveling the marvelous state of Montana. It's bigger than I remembered. But we've probably had, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 meetings, fundraisers and stuff. But the number of people we meet directly, which it's good to have you here, is, you know, maybe 1,000 people. That's who we get to have eye-to-eye contact with and answer their questions. So it's up to each of you as a citizen to assess us and then spread the word to everybody you know, because it's absolutely impossible for each of us to reach the 130-some thousand voters in Montana. So again, that's part of your civic duty.
Thank you for answering that. Judge Lynch, you had mentioned challenges, so here is a challenging question. It's a two-parter, so I'll go slow. Are both of you familiar with the district court judge decision in Broadwater County where the county was sued for approving a subdivision with insufficient water rights / water capacity? How would you advise Supreme Court decisions related to water rights availability in the face of growing development needs that may outpace what our environment can support?
First of all, I have to be very cautious because my opponent, Mr. Corey Swanson, is the Broadwater County attorney. He advised the county in the case you're referring to as the Horse Creek case, or the question comes from, is the Horse Creek case. It was absolutely against the law, and Judge Michael McMahon out of Helena held that it was. I don't think that case has been appealed, but it has.
It has not.
Yeah, I don't think it's, so thank you. It has not been appealed, but it still may come before the court someday. It's a very, very important issue. Water rights in Montana, as we all know, just as we drive here today and see how low the water levels are in the Clark Fork River, water rights are essential, and we can't allow developers. I'm not against development, but we can't allow them to destroy our aquifers and our rivers. We just can't, or we don't have Montana as we know it. The Supreme Court, I can't address that case specifically, as you understand. I think Judge McMahon did. But that issue is going to come before the court in the future. I will mention this because my opponent isn't here. He's sort of carrying the water for folks, so to speak.
So, in my practice of law before I became a judge, I represented a lot of farmers and ranchers on water rights issues. And in Montana, we have the prior appropriation doctrine, first in right, first in time. And so the issues that I handled and dealt with as an attorney were ones where our water court already has adjudicated the water rights, and it was a dispute as to who could use more. As a district court judge, I have handled those kinds of cases as well. I have handled cases where people are trying to cut off water to people. I've handled cases, so water is a big issue, and with the way that the world is going, we're going to have, it's going to become more scarce. I mean, I've long said, I think our next world war is going to be over water, but because we need to be worried about that. The case that you mentioned, whoever mentioned it, was not appealed, but the issues that, because it wasn't appealed, in some other place, under some other circumstance, the same issues can be brought up, and that could be appealed, and it's for that reason we can't comment on what we would think about it. What we would do, though, when issues of water are raised is that you have to do a balancing. If the government is going to, in any way, you're going to have competing developers against the public, and you have to weigh those, see where the benefits fall each way, recognizing that we can't disregard individual rights and the right to water.
Thank you for answering that as the way you guys can right now. So the next audience question is, keeping in mind that the court is not political, as we hear that some appointments are conservative and others are more liberal, how will your appointments shape or balance out the court?
Well,
Go ahead.
no. Well, first of all, the state courts are not appointed. That's, one of the things Montana is, about half the states they have elected courts versus appointed courts, justices or judges. Contrary to the system I came from in the federal system, where, as you're all familiar with, the appointment process, the senator nominates and then the president nominates, and then it goes before a vote of the Supreme Court. Montana has always elected its judges, and that's pursuant to the 1972 Constitution. Now, there is also a push afoot to have judges appointed in Montana, and it's always been a kind of an interesting point of discussion. I think that that's just giving background because we're not appointed, but the balance I will bring to the court, and I believe Judge Bidigari will too, is that we've been in the trenches. I have almost 40 years of experience in the law. 14 years as a judge, 14 years working in the federal system, 10 years as a practitioner. We've been through the wars, so to speak, and we have, I think, we will bring a balanced view to the court from our experience that I think will be of a great benefit to the state of Montana. To be quite honest, these questions are kind of hard because you don't want to be a braggadocio, right?
Well, isn't that the point of campaigning?
Yeah, but anyway, no, you're right, absolutely right. But experience matters, and I firmly believe judicial experience matters. So when you go to check mark your ballots, think about experience.
Yeah. In terms of balance, I guess because of the very organized and concentrated, concerted effort to politicize our courts, where routinely judges are characterized as either liberal or conservative and those sorts of things, which don't really have any place in jurisprudence, I'm not going to address it in that way at all. All I can say is that my judicial philosophy is rooted in the rule of law, which means that nobody is above the law. The law applies to everybody, and it's about fairness, respect, and impartiality without bowing to any kind of an outside pressure. So it intrigues me when all of these flyers that get sent out, because they're basically playing to the understanding that a lot of our citizenry don't take the time really to remember their civics maybe, or to understand the process. They use these terms and tried to coax people to vote based on emotion rather than on facts. And unfortunately, when that happens, you have an outcome of possibly electing unqualified people to different positions. You know, when you pick one target issue to base all of your voting decisions on, you do have a tendency to pick people that might not know enough about the real issues that matter, the real issues that actually will come up. And so I avoid, as much as I can, referring to those political terms, because really I believe there's no place for that in the court system.
Thank you for both of your thoughts. As things are politicized, that shouldn't be. Going into the next audience question, what are your thoughts on our country's punitive approach to justice?
Well, Montana has a law. The legislature has set out the sentencing policy for the state of Montana, which basically has 4 points to it. And included within the 4 points is punishment, but also included within it is rehabilitation. So I was first elected as a district court judge in 2002 and have been elected 3 times since. They're 6-year terms. Within a few years of being elected, I implemented the first treatment court east of Billings, Montana for my 5-county judicial district because prior to becoming a district judge, I had handled criminal cases and mental commitment type cases, been appointed to represent people on both sides of the case, both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, and knew like how broken our system is and how odd it seems that our country, when it implemented the drug on wars, which has been an abysmal failure, decided to criminalize addiction, substance use disorders, and mental health disorders. So I'm proud of our treatment courts in my judicial district because that we've had many people go through it with success. Some people recidivate later, but the net effect of those treatment courts that I started and have presided over for the last 18, almost 19 years is that we've reduced crime, we've saved taxpayers' money, and we have transformed lives, not only of the people who completed the treatment court, but of every person they touch, mainly their family and friends. So I think there's a good movement for that in our country, and I think that's good.
If we don't believe in rehabilitation, we're not going to solve the crime problem. And I think Montana, unfortunately, we're making strides, it's making strides, but when I read where you have 200, 300, whatever number of prisoners being housed in Arizona or being housed here or housed there out of state, it causes me concern because I do know from my experience that if we're going to rehabilitate someone, they have to have support. They have to have family support. And I saw that in the federal system because there's no federal prisons in Montana, and usually the vast majority of people sentenced are Native American people just because of the nature of jurisdiction. But when they're sent to Marianna, Georgia or Sheridan, Oregon, they're not going to get the rehabilitation that they need because you know what? They need to see their father, their mother every day, something. We need to not allow that to happen in Montana. Unfortunately, right now it is. But the whole thing comes down, we could have a much more or less punitive system. It all comes down to money. Do we want to pay for, low security prisons or prisons for drug offenders, for instance, which the war on drugs was a dismal failure, and I agree with that. But, different statuses of security so that we don't dehumanize someone who's made a mistake. Now, granted, there are those people that are dangerous and need to be under, close supervision, but not everybody should be put in the same kettle of soup.
And I didn't mean to suggest that no drug issue shouldn't be criminal, because like selling drugs, which perpetuates
no, I agree, yeah.
So I kind of blanket said it. I didn't mean to suggest that. I do think that there is some criminal element to drug crimes.
I think we probably agree that, selling
Yeah.
versus a user.
Selling and making.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing worse than selling to make the profit, but it's a hard issue. I think we've made some strides, but we need to go further.
Absolutely. Anything but core civic. So to go on to our next question, do you agree with the Montana Supreme Court's finding in the Maid versus Montana affordable housing case? And do you share the view of the housing law they hold? Knowing that you had answered previously that you can't really talk on most Supreme Court.
That particular question, the housing in Montana, obviously is an issue that has to be addressed. But as to that specific case, and I think whoever asked the question is referring to the case out of Gallatin County, where in what do we call it? Not in building, but where you can build more structures in a neighborhood. That's going to be before the court, and I know it already went once. But it's going to be back before the court, so I can't comment directly on that. Just can't do it.
And then as far as just generally the decisions that the Montana Supreme Court makes, when we become licensed to practice law, each of us takes an oath, just as every person who is elected to any office in the state takes the same oath, to support, uphold, and defend the United States and Montana constitutions. And so when the Supreme Court of Montana decides a case, I don't sit there and criticize. I try to understand what it is, knowing that I might down the road be asked to apply it, and also knowing that when somebody asks me to apply it, the opposing side might point out holes in it or whatever. So I don't usually read those cases with an eye toward, do I agree with them or do I disagree with them? I read them toward my goal in reading the case is, do I understand their rationale and how they got to where they got? Because that's kind of the process I'm going to be expected to sort of follow when faced with the same issue.
Thank you guys for those thoughtful answers. The next question we have is Corey Swanson has proposed opening up court conferences to the public. What are your thoughts on this, and do you think that is the correct way to increase transparency and public trust in the court?
I will answer that first, since that's my opponent. I believe in transparency in every branch of government, but then there's also a pragmatic or practical aspect of things. If you were to open up, in my view, if you were to open up the conferences where justices are struggling to find the correct answer, discussing, exchanging ideas, et cetera, if that's all public, that can lead to people thinking that the court's going to do one thing and then acting according to that, for instance. But I think the discussions would not be as frank as they should be if they're not allowed to conference. Now, the thing is, everything the court does is ultimately made public. There's dissenting opinions, there's majority opinions, but how you get to that decision should just be open to the public. I'm not in favor of that. I think it could be destructive, and I think that's why there's not an appellate court, to my knowledge, in the country, certainly not in the federal system, certainly not in the United States Supreme Court, where we just bring cameras into the chambers to see how everybody's thinking, because, you've all been in negotiations of some kind. I mean, times they can get testy, et cetera, but at the end of the day, you try to come to a compromise. I don't think when you talk about transparency of the courts, it shouldn't be opening up the deliberations.
I agree with that position. I think the best decisions come from free exchange of ideas and uninhibited actual discussion, because it just as that's how our jury system works. I mean, is he going to propose next that all jury deliberations be televised to the public, so that everybody can watch it? We already have a difficult time getting people to serve on juries. I can't imagine how difficult it would be if they knew that once they get into that room and have to decide a really difficult issue, whether a homicide was committed or any other difficult issue that a jury does have to address, are we going to make that open to the public? Because we have the right to express ourselves or whatever, but our system really does depend upon people freely being able to discuss things. That's when our best outcomes arrive, I guess. And then the other thing is, like, we have a whole body of law where, like, settlement negotiations and things like that are all confidential. Again, for the same reason, because you're not going to reach a resolution probably if you know that every single offer you made in the course of trying to resolve a dispute is going to be fair game for everyone else to hear. And so I think it's a bad idea.
I think the judge makes a very, very good point on the dynamics of discussion, and the jury trial is the most amazing feature of our democracy, I think. But the dynamism in a jury deliberation would be stymied if it's recorded or it's posted. And the same is true, I think, of judges and justices making decisions. It's the dynamic. And I did a lot of mediation, and you're right on point again, Judge. It's getting to do that confidentially so that people can express their views and not be held to that view the next go around. It's just the dynamism of it is just important.
Thank you for answering that. And I just want to say this crowd is small and mighty. Y'all are letting them have it with these questions. So with that said, let's get into this next one. What is y'all's opinion on the future of the death penalty in Montana? Just something light, just a light question at you.
That's for the legislature.
That is for the legislature ultimately to determine. I have a personal philosophy that doesn't carry what I would do as a justice. I think Montana's, at least it has been tending towards eliminating the death penalty. Haven't done that yet. So that's again one of those questions. It could come to the court, even though it's probably up to the legislature, still could come to the court in a constitutional question, which I wouldn't be able to answer, or the judge. I don't think.
No, I agree.
Okay, we'll go on to the next question. Y'all are answering like lawyers up here. It's so weird. We're
not lawyers.
Oh, yeah, sorry. We don't want to conflate the two. Do you believe that under the Montana Constitution, right to dignity and privacy, transgender people should have access to gender-affirming health care?
Oh, you're going to say, God, you're a weenie. But that case is actually making its way to the court. I would say this, very interesting background on the right to privacy decision regarding women's reproductive autonomy in Armstrong. There was an internal debate about to address that issue under the right to privacy versus the right to individual dignity. The court, and that's what happens. The dynamics we're talking about ended up going on the right, basing the decision on the right to privacy. When it comes to transgender care, that's a question that most definitely will be before the court very, very soon. And unfortunately, neither of us can really address that. But it will be before the court, and then you have to. I get, as a citizen, you can read the rationale in the Armstrong case or the Weems case regarding women's reproductive freedom, and get a feeling for where the court may go. But then that depends on who's sitting on the court, and that's what's so important about these two races. The one thing that's important to remember: the Montana Constitution was drafted in 1972 versus 1789 or whatever it was. And so we have a more history that informed the decisions in the 1972 Constitution. So that's something to bear in mind because society's changed.
The only thing I would add to that is that when these issues were raised on the federal, when they've been raised at the United States Supreme Court level, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that's what controls the decision at the federal level. The United States Constitution does not include a specified right of privacy. It was found as a penumbra in the First Amendment, and it's not spelled out. the Montana Constitution spells out a right of privacy. So the analysis of that issue and issues related to that would be entirely different in Montana than it was in the federal cases.
Thank you for answering that as best you can. Over the last several terms of the Supreme Court, we've seen a departure from strictly following precedent. What are your thoughts on precedent, and do you think Montana is at a similar crossroads to rewrite the foundations of law? Thank you. Oh, polite.
Just as to the first part, was the first part the precedent hasn't been followed in the Montana court or the U.S. Supreme Court?
The U.S. Supreme Court. And what do you think of Montana's at the current, similar to the crossroads to the rewrite of the foundations?
It could be, depending again on the dynamic of this race and who sits on the court. I would say this, and I said it, I think, in my opening statement, that precedent is important. It's the foundation of the legal system. Now, there are going to be, because it provides stability. It provides stability in people deciding how they wish to lead their lives. It provides stability for businesses. It provides stability to our entire society. Now, there can be cases which were wrongly decided, but before those cases are reversed, so to speak, it's got to be really one that demands it. And there's been very few, actually, in the history of our country. And I think I will talk about the Dobbs decision in regard to women's reproductive freedom. Whatever side of the coin one may be on that issue, it did disrupt. I think even Justice Roberts one time said that when you overturn precedent, it's a jolt to the legal system, but more importantly, I would say it's a jolt to society. So you have to, as a justice, I would be very, very careful in overturning precedent. I have said I will follow the precedent of Armstrong, for instance, because people's lives depend on what the layout is in the legal world.
Precedent is the hallmark of our judicial system. It does inform the stability that I think all of us are expected to have. The courts resolve disputes when people can't resolve them without resorting to the courts. And when attorneys advise their clients, whether they be human beings or business entities or whatever, they base their advice to their clients on what the law is as set forth in the precedent in the cases that have been decided. So many issues never make it to the courts because the advice of attorneys based on precedent guides people on how to go forward. When they're not able to determine that and they raise an issue in court, I firmly believe it's the responsibility of the courts to base the decision on the relevant facts, the applicable law, the established law, which would be the precedent, and unless there is some huge flaw that everyone has looked over time that makes a prior case incorrect, it should stand.
Thank you for that answer on precedent. This one you're gonna have to bear with me because the handwriting's a little hard for me to read. So if I don't get your question exactly right, I apologize. What are your guys' thoughts on the Montana working compensation system that includes its own state work comp court consisting of one politically appointed judge by the Montana governor? Is it vulnerable to the bias of the Montana governor? And how is a workers' comp judge replaced, term limited, or dismissed?
I think, well, I'm going to confess I can't answer every aspect of that question, but their terms, I think, are 4 years, appointed by the governor. But there is recourse ultimately to the Montana Supreme Court via, even though it's its own workman's compensation system with one judge, there is recourse ultimately to the Montana Supreme Court. Whether that should be changed or not, it kind of goes to what everybody's kind of familiar with in the United States Supreme Court decision in Chevron, where we have an administrative state. And the question is that practical or not? My view is it is practical because, again, everything comes down to finances. If you want to have a lot more district judges, more Supreme Court justices, and so forth, you don't have to have administrative law judges. It just, to me, it's a practical thing, but ultimately there is recourse through the actual Supreme Court.
Yeah. Of all the different kinds of law that I had to practice during the time that I was an attorney, and all of the different kinds of cases that come before me as a district court judge, work comp is not one of them, because the only work comp issue that comes before me is maybe when somebody's been hurt and whether work comp exclusivity takes jurisdiction away from me. You know, that's the only thing I ever have to deal with. So I have to confess, I have never really totally paid attention to how that judge is picked or whatever, because I'm kind of far removed from what they do. And I didn't practice work comp law. But it's true what Judge Lynch said, that if somebody is dissatisfied with the decision that the workers' compensation judge makes, their recourse is to appeal that decision to the Montana Supreme Court.
I want to add one point that maybe some of you are familiar with, but we had a judicial nominating process in place until recently, where you had the governor appoint 2 people to the Judicial Nominating Committee, two lay people, so to speak. The Supreme Court appointed a person, and then I guess the other district judges. Same with the Judicial Standards Commission. That is all now changed, and we could debate for a long time the prudence in those moves. I have concern about it, particularly with the Judicial Standards Commission, that where before the Supreme Court would appoint one lawyer with 10 years of experience, the judges, the 46, I guess it is, right, throughout the state,
51,
or 51, they would select 2 people to sit on the Judicial Standards Commission, the commission that, you know, does discipline for judges. And then the third was 2 by the governor, 1 by the Supreme Court, 2 by the judges themselves. That's all changed. The court now does not, the court, as of June 30th of this coming year, the court has no say. It's going to be the Attorney General that appoints the attorney. It's going to be the governor that has 2 appointees, and it's going to be the Speaker of the House that has 2 other appointees. It's going to be a drastic change. But it kind of goes to the same thing with the Judicial Nominating Committee in terms of how you select and replace judges, including the workman's comp judge.
And then I want to say one more thing about appointment. Early on, somebody asked a question about appointment. We are elected, but if one of us were to die or retire during our term, that's when it used to be that the Judicial Nominating Committee vetted applicants and gave 3 names or so to the governor from among which to pick, which now that's been eliminated. So now if one of us were to die or retire, the governor picks without input from others, you know. I mean, I'm not going to say he doesn't get input from others, but without input from that kind of a committee that was made up of people from different disciplines, including attorneys.
A broader spectrum of citizens,
right.
for sure.
And then as far as appointment, the question, this one brought up appointment too, that it's appointed by the governor. One of the things too, it looks like, is being considered from what's coming out of the Judicial Oversight Committee that's been meeting regularly, is that they are also kind of thinking about making it so that the governor just appoints judges, which would really disenfranchise us in selecting people. Because I can say personally, myself, I've lived under a rock in eastern Montana. No, and I have no political connections. I've never been a politician. I've never had anything to do with politics. No governor would have ever appointed me to be a district court judge. I would never have had the job I've had for the last 21 years because I'm not politically connected. And so you do have to think about that right now we do have the opportunity as Montanans to select our judges by voting. Both at every level, the courts, well, not municipal court judges, sometimes like city council or whatever picks them, but justices of the peace are elected. A lot of places have their city court elected or whatever, but district court judges are elected, you know, and our Supreme Court justices are elected. So kind of concentrating that selection process into one human being really does disenfranchise
I
the
think
voting
so.
public.
One other thing I want to mention, a little off topic, but sort of on the same thing, is the importance of the Chief Justice seat when it comes to a judge, or if a justice has to recuse him or herself from a case, and the authority to pick another judge from the ranks of the district court judges lies with the Chief Justice. Now, why is that important? Because you could have a 4-3 decision on any topic you wish, let's just say women's reproductive freedom. And then if one of the judges, if you have a new chief judge that's more of a, let's say, conservative bent, and then he's the person or she's the person that appoints a judge, if one of the other one, justice, if one of the other one has to recuse, you can go from a 4-3 decision one way to a 4-3 decision the other way. So because of the limited number of justices on the Montana Supreme Court, the authority of the Chief Justice in appointing a justice to fill a position in a particular case when there's a recusal is quite important.
I'm just going to hop in here real quick. While we'd love to pick both your guys' brains all night, we unfortunately do not have you booked all night to talk with all of us. So we're going to do one final audience question and then wrap up for the evening.
Thank you for those last really thoughtful, informative answers. And it sounds like it's just voting and paying attention on who you vote for. So we'll end it on this really nice softball question.
Are you going to make us sing?
I won't sing.
I mean, I loved that. We could go back to that if you would like. How do you feel about incarceration as a judge?
Incarceration has its place. There are dangerous people that need to be incarcerated, and our legislature in Montana has recognized that. We have statutes that say that incarceration basically should be reserved for dangerous offenders and repeat offenders. So our law, the way the legislature has passed it, considers that important feature. There's something called an iatrogenic effect, which is that when you put people with people who are worse behaving than them, you don't generally have the effect of making the worst behaving people become better behaving. You instead almost universally have the people become more criminal, become worse. And so I take seriously when I sentence people whether they should be sent to the prison, because you can really cause a lot of harm without really affecting any public safety. If you warehouse somebody for, let's say, 5 years and they come out a mass murderer, have you accomplished anything? They didn't do anything in that 5 years to anybody, but maybe they would have never done anything horrible if you hadn't even sent them to prison to begin with. And then another part, the substance use disorder and mental health. Incarcerating people for substance use disorder and mental health issues does not work. If you warehouse somebody with a substance use disorder in a jail, they do not move on the continuum of addressing their substance use disorder at all. They come out at the end of their incarceration at the same point in that continuum as they were when they went in. You're much better off to try to treat people in the community setting where they're going to have to use their tools. And that's my last thing on incarceration.
Obviously, I agree with Judge Bidigari. Incarceration has its place. We all know that for violent offenders. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier. I like to emphasize a lot of it comes down to the facilities that we don't have. We could separate out offenders better if we didn't house them in the same facility. Now that takes money. But the one thing I have concern with in the state system, unlike the federal system I was in, is people who are charged with a crime, but they have to go to jail because they can't post a bond to get out. In the federal system, as when I was a judge, that didn't happen. I mean, there were people that obviously if they were a danger to the community, that was the ultimate question, they would be incarcerated. But if they weren't a danger to the community, they didn't have to pay money to get out. Now, that's a constitutional issue in our state because everybody has the right to bail, but I visited yesterday with a municipal judge out of Belgrade that said it's so difficult because you have somebody that's not a violent offender, but they can't pay the, $1,500 in bail. That's something I think we have to address as a state.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our fabulous MC on TE. And thank you for
I'm
your...
going to hit here.
Oh, yeah,
There we go. Perfect. Thank you for your incredible questions, all of y'all. And thank you so much, Judge Bidigary, Judge Lynch, for attending tonight and for your thoughtful responses.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I will say one final thing. I'm a talker, but please contact everybody. If after you've heard us, after you read about us, if you think we're the right candidate, please contact as many people as you can because we can't get this done alone.
On that note, I'll remind you all to update your voter registration, and we've just talked a whole lot about how important voting is, and make sure that you vote for the Supreme Court candidate that you believe in on November 5th. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you so much.